Right, welcome back. Thanks for staying with us. We are approaching, or we have approached, the final and very exciting part of the day. And this is the camera, so there you are. It's been a long day, but we have had so many interesting insights. You have met many people from the Stockholm School of Economics, but I'd like to introduce another one. So I've been joined by Professor Magnus Märing. You are the holder of the Erling Persson Professorship in Entrepreneurship and Digital Innovation. And you're also the chair of the House of Innovation, which we've talked about on numerous occasions today.
That's right. And I'm also delighted to be here. So great to be here. And I've been with us all the day, and I've seen all the exciting discussions in the chat. So now I'm delighted to be on stage.
Right. And it's been a long day. Many, many interesting insights. You have prepared a little recap.
Yes. I thought it would be useful since this is the final part of the day and we're now trying to sort of look back on the day we've had, but also look forward to the future, if you will. What I thought would be useful is just to do a very quick recap of some of the things that we have talked about. Of course, this is going to be criminally short. There's no way we can talk about everything that we have just been discussing. So first, the first module that we had was global knowledge networks. Sorry, here we go. So there we talked about data-driven, open, dispersed, collaborative innovation was one theme. We talked about real-time data flows, but also the challenge of making those data flows useful and usable. We talked about individualized service delivery, and we talked about empowerment of patients in particular through their access to their own data and their ability to interpret their own data. We also talked about a number of challenges: ethics, privacy, data ownership, misuse of data, etc. So that was the first module. The second module was about smart regions. And there we talked about entrepreneurial ecosystems and regional prosperity and the importance of thinking smartly about what growth really means in an entrepreneurial context if we are looking to improve the environment, the context of these companies. We also talked about digitally enabled social innovation in smart villages, for example. And there was a lot of discussions about what smart really means and in what ways we can make smart smart. For example, smart being also sustainable. Another aspect was, do we act small now or do we try to create systemic solutions, and how can we do both? And finally, we had a lot of discussions about how to reach everyone and everywhere in this context. So finally, we have just had the conversations about smart organizations. We talked about how AI drives scale and scope and learning, how that can be accelerated considerably. We talked about the complexity of the human-machine relationship. We've talked about organizational strategies, government involvement, but also quite a few challenges also here, of course: knowledge and capabilities, bringing people along, ethics, leading with the heart, combining high tech with becoming more human, if you will, and thus also combining soft and hard skills. So those are some of the themes that we've been discussing. And now it's time for us to try to both sort of wrap up the conversation we've had throughout the day, but also look forward. What type of actions are we being prompted to venture into? What kind of activities do we need to go into that we haven't talked about before, or that we haven't done traditionally? So that's my too short summary of the day. What do you think, Katarina?
Excellent, thank you very much. I think it's time to invite our guests to join us here and to each take your seat. Please go ahead. Right, so some of you have been with us all day and you will recognize a few of the panelists, but we have also been joined by a few new guests, so I will introduce everyone. First, I'd like to introduce the Archbishop, Dr. Antje Jackelén. You are very welcome to the closing conversation.
Thank you.
Caroline Berg, you are chair of the board of Axel Jonsson. You are also very welcome. Marcus Wallenberg, chair of the board of SEB and board member of the Wallenberg Foundations. Welcome.
Thank you.
And finally, Roberto Verganti, professor of leadership and innovation at the Stockholm School of Economics. We are very glad to have you here for this final discussion. Magnus.
That's right. And let's kick this off immediately. And so one of the things that I find has been recurrent, sometimes underlying theme of today is empowerment. How do we achieve empowerment of, for example, of patients, of consumers, of citizens? So I'm curious about that empowerment because at the same time we're looking at increasingly ubiquitous artificial agents that influence our lives. So there seems to be a tension here, and that tension, I think, is you know, in many respects, but it's also something we can already see on social media in the relationship between individuals and companies. And for example, you know, a consumer may have the opinion that before I buy a pair of Nikes, I want to know what Nike thinks of Black Lives Matter. And if Nike doesn't tell me, then my Facebook feed will tell me. So, Marcus, how in a way, this means that companies are relatively quickly being asked or requested or required to take a much more active position in terms of how they view social issues.
Of course.
How does that play out in general right now, do you think? And what does it mean in relation to digitalization?
Well, I guess what you're saying is that the empowerment of the consumer plays an enormous part here, and that is part of the problem. I think I will divert this question of the empowerment of the retail consumer to Caroline, but I think the matter is extremely important because what it forces corporations to do going forward is to be much more agile in thinking through its value system, a value base. In this time and age of where you can get right information out or wrong information out, you are probably forced today to think through these issues much earlier. And this also, this puts a lot of needed thinking behind on your innovation side, on how you disperse information inside your corporations, and how you get to know your people. Because we're used to hierarchical, traditional hierarchical structures in these companies. And to a certain extent, in certain businesses, you have to stay with that. But you must be much more proactive and on your toes in terms of developing the way you think and why. And this is going to be, I think, a recurring issue. Part of this question is what you talked about earlier, the importance of understanding data and who is actually in possession of the data and why going forward. And that will also be a very important part of your whole. But I think it will, as you said from the start, it will put an enormous amount of pressure on corporations themselves to think much forward.
Thank you. And that's, just to reflect on what you're saying, it also seems to me that what you're saying is that if companies are successful or if organizations are successful in doing this, there is also there's an aspect of increased autonomy for the individual because you're not acting in accordance with hierarchical control structures. You're acting much more in terms of values and what's the right thing to do. And that requires then the individual to engage in that.
Of course, depending on which business you're in.
Yes.
Certain businesses are highly regulated. There you still need
Of
to
course.
live within the boundaries. But I would turn this question around a little bit. And that is, I think, for most corporations, it will be extremely important to empower people, to make them feel that they actually can move forward within certain boundaries in a much more proactive way themselves. And that will give you a lot of mileage in terms of how much the individual employee actually can do.
So let me hang on to the empowerment aspect a little bit longer, and I'd like to ask the Archbishop. Professor Jansiti had a comment about the need to build ethical solutions from the start. So we can't throw the ethical yeast into the oven after the dough. It has to be in the dough from the beginning. And you also talked about this, but at the same time, you also talked about the unpredictability of the consequences of digital technologies. And that, to me, seems challenging. So how can we act ethically when we cannot predict the consequences of the things that we develop? Help.
Well, yes, I think that is the story about the horizons again, that we need to look even beyond the horizon, which is impossible, but that is what transcendence tells us. It is possible in some way to understand and live as well as we can, as ethically as we can, in front of the horizon. I mean, in a sense, nothing is new. All technology shifts have employed this. We can't foresee all the consequences, but when you are in it, of course, you don't see the end. So there is an unpredictability, and we tend to think, for good reasons, that the unpredictability in this case is even more severe than, let's say, when the printing press was invented. So it's not only about social unrest, it's about the very understanding of what a human being is. It's not only about losing work, it's about understanding our work opportunities. It's about understanding what does work mean for the sense of being a human person. And these are deeply philosophical, deeply spiritual questions, and it's exciting to face them. But we need to face them together, of course, and we need to face them also in a multidisciplinary, multi-sectorial, multi-faith, multicultural way, because we cannot make the standard white Western middle-class approach to the universal approach for the whole globe. That will not work. So we have learned better than that by now.
But at the same time, I can certainly see that this would create a lot of anxiety in many individuals. Right?
Yeah, and I think anxiety is one of the big problems of our time. I mean, you can't just brush away anxiety. You have to take it seriously, and yet not to succumb to it. I mean, the 5 Ps that I was talking about in my presentation, I think the root is, as I said, a surplus of fear and a deficit of hope. So how can you decrease the fear and increase the hope?
So Caroline, you have many employees in your companies. So I'll pass that question from the Archbishop on to you. How do you do that? Or more concretely, how do you work with, in a way, empowering people then?
I'm a great believer of giving people a lot of responsibility and trust. And I think that is a key. But it's also about creating cultures in our businesses where we have to create cultures where it's easy to test things, to take many small steps instead of big ones. And then it's easier to fail. So you have to have cultures where we are brave to try new things, and also where it's okay to fail and learn, and build trust through doing that. So I think that's important from a people point of view. But also, it's interesting now with the digital development that has been these past months, that we anticipated was going to happen in 3 years, happened in 3 weeks or even 3 days. And in a sense, it's also a democratic period that we have behind us, because the reskilling and upskilling in competence in the digital has been huge. For example, if you look at our older population, people over 75, when you look at buying groceries, for example, only less than 1% have ever tried buying groceries online.
Right.
And then after the pandemic, it's 25%. So a very large, and this happened so quickly. And I think that is a very strong sort of message in that we can learn and we can feel like we can empower our actions through learning and trying again. And this also comes with online shopping in general.
So clearly, sometimes you say, one says, never waste a good crisis, and definitely there have been some acceleration of innovation going on in this particular crisis, although I'm sure all of us wish it was over. I just want to check with you, Katarina, if you have any questions.
I do, yes. I'd like to pick up on it's been discussed many times during the day that there are threats and opportunities around technology. And sometimes we think, will all these technological advances make us more technocratic, or will it make us more democratic? And in your recent book, Archbishop, you also talked about the danger of relying on technology and thinking that we can control everything. And then suddenly a crisis comes along, like the pandemic, and then we go looking for wisdom and try to find other sources. Who can guide us in this crisis? I'd like to know a little bit about how can we, where do we find this wisdom, and where do we help people find this wisdom?
Well, if I may, I would like to go back to actually 15th century to Nicolaus of Cusanus, a very learned person, philosopher, theologian, and when he talks about the mind and reason, he says, well, there is both ratio, Latin for the rational part of our reason, and intellectus. And ratio in Latin means to calculate. So the ratio is the part of our reason that calculates, that controls, and all this kind of things, which is very, very important for us to live. But intellectus is the part of our reason that is connected to insight, to wisdom, to the connectedness, but also to the capacity to relate constructively to that which cannot be known, and that which we will never be able to know, obviously. And his point is, it is the integration of these two that make a mature human being. And I think these two sources of rationality is something that we need to cultivate, especially in times of crisis and in times of profound change, because here I think we have the source that can nurture the resilience that we need, and that in turn gives us the courage to hope. Because hope to me has at least 3 components. One component is to be able to harbor the anger about that which is not right. But it's also humility in the sense that we know our place, we know our limits, and it is courage to step up and do all these good things that we can imagine.
So preparing for the unknown is a central component, and I'd like to take this to you, Roberto. At the Stockholm School of Economics, we talk a lot about preparing our students for the unknown. We've even adopted an educational mission to prepare them better. How do you translate that into your work?
What we're trying to do now at the garden and at the House of Innovation and taking care of the garden, because it's a way to nurture and think about the future. And the assumption we have, it's an assumption, as always when you do research you make assumptions, is that we need a new kind of leadership. The way we picture leadership traditionally is judgmental, so you have options in front of you and then you need to say, okay, what is the best one, what does make more sense. And I think in a moment like this, then we enter into this discussion of pessimism, optimism, threats, opportunity. Threat, opportunity is something we discuss in our theories. Strategies about, there are threats, there are opportunities. Maybe in this moment, the assumption that we need a different kind of mindset, and instead of looking at threat and opportunities, looking at possibilities. And possibility is something that is not there yet, but you need to imagine them. Typically in business schools, the possibility comes from somewhere else. There are engineers that create things, there are designers that create things, and our job as leaders is just to decide where to go, and okay. But maybe we can nurture a new breed of leaders who are also good in imagining possibilities. And that's what we are trying to do at the Garden, which is the Center for Design and Leadership. How can we leverage on the capability of design to imagine, and not only imagine, but making things. Design is also, is really transforming. So you're not there lost into, is this good or this bad, but you're lost into, regardless if this is good or bad, how can I imagine a future that is different? And also to leave a little bit of the narrative of the future is right, the future is wrong, oh my God. And when you imagine something, you don't think this will be good or bad, or because we know that in reality, life in the future will still be good and bad. I mean, there's no hope that we will be happy. I'm sorry. We will always be a little bit happy and a little bit sad. But we want to create a future that is more meaningful. And meaningful doesn't mean happy. It's another story. It makes more sense. And this is the responsibility of leaders to design. The design really means imagine and make things that are much more meaningful. And from our perspective, I have to say the fun comes now, because given that machine will take care of problem solving, which is the most boring thing ever. I'm an engineer, so I'm bored of solving problems. We can let this to the machine and really focus, what does it really make sense? That's the space that, we don't have the tools. Honestly, Magnus, and do we really know how to make sense of things and imagine things that makes things work better? We don't teach this. There is a huge space of research. And hopefully the idea is to work together with leaders and find out this way of imagining things.
Yeah, and I think the difference between making sense and solving problems is quite large, right? So, there's this saying, what we call progress is often the exchange of one nuisance for another, and that's a consequence of, in a way, solving one problem at a time without being driven by meaning or values, because then you solve one problem, you discover a new problem, and then you solve that problem, and so that there is a fundamental difference there, which I think connects back to the value-based approach.
Yeah, and design is in reality is making sense of things through solving problems. So
right.
You don't separate the two things. You
Right.
don't solve problem. You don't make sense. You make sense by solving the things. That is very connected to the idea of hope. So
it seems to me that one thing that is becoming much more and more salient in the conversation, especially now during the afternoon. It has to do with a preparedness, which we often call bildning or Bildung, in contrast to education. So I don't know how to ask the question that I have here, because it's a much more structurally oriented question, but I still want to ask it, because in this challenge that digitalization means for us, for organizations, for society, there's definitely quite a few challenges also, of course, related to sustainability that require big picture solutions. So I'm wondering, and I think this was a theme earlier today from Solomon Darwin, for example. Do we need more coordination, for example, on a national level when we talk about digitalization? Do we need more national initiatives or national solutions? Do we need more supranational coordination? Or is that going to slow us down? What do you think? The floor.
Well, If I can
Please,
take
please.
one stab at this question, I think that there are many ways the nation can help this whole question along. And one of those questions that we debate a lot is about the infrastructure. If you think about the communication infrastructure, mobile infrastructure going forward, because I mean, what are we doing? We are moving the frontier forward the whole time, and to do that in an effective way, it's extremely important that we have the infrastructure in place to be able to do it. So let me take an example. You have 5G, which will not only be voice and text, and it's going to have an enormous amount of data that will pass along. If you think about healthcare systems, healthcare system will, if you have the infrastructure in place, be possible in completely different ways how to approach that for the individual consumer. But it will be difficult for individuals to take care of that infrastructure. And as part of the infrastructure, I think the educational system has to be there. So I think definitely the state, in a good way, just like we have a physical infrastructure for bridges and trains and everything, also in this digital world, the whole communication and the basic digital infrastructure would serve the country very well.
Yeah.
And also I think we need to work less in silos in general. I think Pia mentioned that too. We need to collaborate much better between, I mean, as a business group, we can do a lot. And I think the values are really important that I would like to connect back to as well in order to attract people and to motivate. But we can do a lot in terms of reskilling and developing and working with decentralized organizations, make people grow and strive. But we need to work together with the educational systems, with the politicians, with the unions, and the civil society. So we need to really work together in order to bring everybody on board. And I think for me, that's a really important perspective, because this day, digital today, is really about not leaving anyone behind. Everybody should have the opportunity to be part of this digital movement and be empowered. That's something that I'm scared of, that a lot of people feel left behind. And what can we do? And
Right.
as a business, you can do some things, but I think we need to work together and make sure and have a national strategy for inclusion and for equality in the digital transformation that we are going through.
So maybe we should think about layered infrastructures. We have the physical, the digital, also the educational. And
Part of it.
And
we are in a hurry.
yes.
This is nothing that's going to happen in a few years. It needs to happen now.
And we also maybe have or we do have the spiritual infrastructure, if you will, which is difficult to assess as an infrastructure, but nevertheless, it seems very central, judging from the conversation we're having.
Caroline, I was thinking in Axel Jonsson, you have a program called 1050, which is, I mean, you talk about in 10 years, 50% of the jobs we don't even know today which ones they will be.
Well, we're saying that in 10 years, 50% of what we do within the group will be things we're not doing today. New offerings, new products, and that means also that 50% need to be new people, of course. But it's not about shifting in and out things. It's really about the most important message in this is that the majority of the new businesses will be coming from our current businesses. And this is a message of transformation and development, and to create cultures that are really passionate about learning, it's like an ABC, about adjusting to the new without the full roadmap. It's about being brave, and it's about what's the C? I was just thinking about it when I was sitting here. Oh, it's about being extremely curious, and to me, it's like the curiosity. If you can breed one thing among your students, it's like a passion for curiosity, to be curious. That will be the key in the future, and the willingness to adapt, learn new things, and you have to be brave because it is difficult to navigate right now. So message back to the school is like, talk about that. When the curiosity is going to be key for anybody to succeed in this new world, then you can be curious also about spirituality.
So that's a positive message. So, and I think that's always welcome. We talked about the high level of anxiety earlier. Now, Caroline, I think Katarina also sort of did something very elegant in terms of asking a question that you've now had time to think a little bit about, namely the aspect of, will technological advances make us more of a technocratic society where the few people that code artifacts are sort of influencing the lives of many, as the Archbishop warned about earlier, or is there also sort of a silver lining or a blue sky scenario where we might become more democratic as a consequence of using more technology? What do you think?
I think it is a very interesting question, and you can choose to look at it from different angles. But I like to look at it as a more democratic, actually. And I'm thinking about how our reskilling or upskilling is taking place. We work in a broad way. For example, we've just had 1,500 people go through a reskilling program in big data and to become data translators, which you need to be in order to work just in the intersection between the digital and other things. So I think that have a broad thinking, and for example, if you're a marketing person, you need to be tech savvy, or if you are working as a purchaser or buyer, you need to be passionate about getting more efficient through the tools that you have. So we have experts, but we also need everybody to become sort of generalists and passionate about tech and learning. So I think of it as a democratic movement, and again, we should make sure everybody is included.
And thank you so much. And I think we're running out of time, so it's time to end. I think we have to end on this note, which I love, because one of my long-term favorite things to talk about is the need to bridge competencies, and I think that also connects very, very well to the theme of connectedness that we've been sort of exploring and searching for today. So thank you very much for that ending.
It does, and I'd like to even add the notion of hope and curiosity and seeing the opportunities that you have all emphasized. So it's important to leave today with a sense of, there are so many opportunities and this is hopeful, and let's face the challenges with curiosity. So with that, we would like to thank you all for having joined us, for sharing your insights.
Thank you.
And this actually ends the day, Magnus.
So it does.
So for us, we would just like to end by saying that the discussions we've had today, we are sure, have sparked insights, ideas, and we would like you to continue the discussion. So first of all, the platform will stay open. That's a very practical side of things, but you can keep discussing in the chat. And we want you to really continue the reflection, right, Magnus?
Absolutely. So please, please stay on the platform for a while. Please stay in touch with us. As Katarina said early on this morning, SSE is a platform for conversation, for dialogue, for exploring ideas, and for making ideas come to life. And that's something we believe very strongly in, and we really want to invite you to continue the dialogue with us.
We would also like to say a very warm thank you to all the speakers, the moderators, the fantastic team that has organized this conference, and to all of you who have, some of you followed us for the whole day. It's been a long day. And those of you who have been able to come in and out a little bit during the day. Thank you so much for logging in and being with us, and for sharing all your thoughts and ideas also in the chat and in other fora. As Magnus says, this is what we do. We create an arena where business, academia, and society come together to reflect, to be inspired, and to innovate around grand challenges in society. So stay tuned. We will be back, and so will everyone that you have seen and listened to today. Thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you very much.